The event was supposed to be a celebration of hip-hop's impact on music, a televised panel, a few performances, and the usual scripted tributes. But the second Eminem and 50 Cent walked onto the stage, it was clear something was off. They weren't here to perform. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here to tear down the system in real time. Eminem stepped to the front, standing behind the microphone, gripping a piece of paper in one hand. His expression was sharp, unreadable, but his posture said everything. This wasn't about promotion. This wasn't about nostalgia. This was about calling out the biggest lie in the music industry, live, with millions watching. Next to him, 50 Cent stood slightly back, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. He wasn't talking yet, but his expression said it all. He knew what was coming, and he was letting Eminem take the first shot. Then, Eminem slapped the paper against the mic stand, letting it hang for the cameras to catch. "This," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the audience, "is a list of every artist who should have won, and every artist who won instead." 50 Cent chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, this has been happening for years." The audience shifted, murmurs growing louder. Some already knew where this was going. Others weren't ready. The host, seated at the side of the stage, looked frozen. This was supposed to be a safe, industry-approved discussion. This was something else. Eminem lifted the paper, eyes scanning the list. They want to talk about hip-hop's legacy? Fine. Let's talk about how they've ignored it for decades. Let's talk about the biggest names in the game getting passed over. On purpose. The crowd went silent. 50 Cent took a step forward. "You ever notice how some people keep winning over and over again while the real ones never get their moment? It's like some people learned how to play the game, and the rest of us, they pretend we don't exist." Producers were scrambling behind the scenes. The teleprompter had nothing for this, but it was too late. The truth was already out. The stage lights burned bright, but the temperature in the room had dropped. Nobody was clapping. Nobody was laughing. The air was thick with something different, unease, realization, maybe even fear. Eminem tilted the paper forward, making sure the cameras got a good look. He didn't need to explain it. The names on that list spoke for themselves. Legends missing from the Grammy winners' history, names that should have been there, names that never were. Then he spoke. "They've been doing this for decades." His voice was calm, steady, the kind of anger that had been sitting for years, waiting for the right moment. "They lied to us all. They use us when they need us. They put us on stage. They let us perform. They let us sell out arenas. But when it comes to the actual respect, when it comes time to hand out awards that actually matter," he glanced at 50 Cent, then back at the audience, "they act like we don't exist." The audience shifted again, some leaning forward, others glancing at each other. Everyone knew what he was talking about. Nobody had ever said it like this. Eminem took a breath, then dropped the first bombshell. DMX had the biggest rap albums of the year, twice. You know how many Grammys he got for it? 0. 50 Cent let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Say that again, man. Because I don't think they heard you." Eminem didn't blink. DMX had the biggest rap albums of the year, 2 years in a row. No Grammys, not even a nomination for Album of the Year. Murmurs spread across the audience. Some people knew this, some didn't. Nobody could ignore it now. He flipped to another name on the list. Nas, one of the greatest lyricists of all time, didn't win a single Grammy for nearly 30 years. Another pause. Snoop Dogg, 0 Grammys. Tupac, 0 Grammys. A sharp inhale rippled through the crowd. "So don't sit here and tell me this ain't rigged." 50 Cent stepped forward, looking out at the audience. "See, the problem is, they pretend like they respect us. They'll let us headline. They'll let us perform. They'll let us carry their whole damn show. But when the trophies come out, they find a way to give it to somebody else. Eminem nodded. Every time. The host, still seated on the far side of the stage, looked like he wanted to disappear. Eminem tightened his grip on the mic. This isn't about me. It never was. This is about all the people they did this to before us, and all the ones they're still doing it to now. Silence. And then, the weight of his words finally landed. 50 Cent took a step forward, adjusting the mic. He looked out at the crowd, some people shifting uncomfortably, others locked in, waiting for what came next. Then, he let out a low chuckle. "You'll remember 2004? A few murmurs rippled through the audience. They knew where this was going. "I do," he said, shaking his head. "That was the year I lost Best New Artist to Evanescence." The room tensed. It wasn't just that 50 Cent lost. It was that he lost when he had one of the biggest debut albums of all time. Get Rich or Die Tryin' had changed the entire sound of hip-hop. It was a cultural shift, a movement, and yet when it came time to recognize that, they handed the award to a rock band. I knew right then, this whole thing is rigged. Eminem nodded, arms crossed, letting 50 have the floor. "Now look, I ain't got nothing against Evanescence, but let's be real. Y'all ever seen a new artist blow up the way I did that year? My album, multi-platinum, my singles, everywhere. My music videos, non-stop rotation, but somehow, someway, they made sure I didn't win." 50 glanced back at Eminem. "Sound familiar?" Eminem smirked. "Every year." The crowd was dead silent now. Some people nodded. Some artists in the back looked down at their feet. "But that was just the beginning," 50 continued. "You know what really told me how fake this whole thing is? My album, the same album that ran the whole year, lost Best Rap Album to Speakerboxx The Love Below." Another pause. "Now, I respect Outkast, but let's be real, y'all think that album was really bigger than mine?" A few gasps, a few heads shaking. Nobody wanted to answer that question. Eminem stepped in. "See, this is what they do. When hip-hop dominates, they change the rules. When they can't ignore us, they find someone else to give it to." 50 Cent nodded. "Exactly. They'll let us sell records, let us break records, let us run the game. But when it's time to give credit, they turn their heads." He took a deep breath, gripping the mic. "And the craziest part? It ain't just us. It's still happening." The audience wasn't sure what to do. Some people were nodding, others just sat frozen. But one thing was clear. This conversation wasn't stopping. It was just getting started. Eminem adjusted his grip on the paper, flipping it over. The front had listed the biggest snubs in Grammy history, names that should have won, but didn't. But on the back, a different kind of list, the names that always won. He held it up for the cameras, letting the moment sink in. And here's the other side of it, the names of the people who figured out how to play the game. The room shifted. A few in the audience sat back in their chairs. Others leaned forward. Eminem's voice was steady, cold. "This isn't just about talent. It's about who the industry picks, who they decide gets to win. And if you don't play by their rules." 50 Cent jumped in. "You get nothing." Eminem nodded. "Nothing." The host, who by now had completely given up on controlling the conversation, tried to interject. "But the Grammys have honored hip-hop, haven't they? I mean, look at—" "No," Eminem cut in, shaking his head. "They haven't." He pointed at the back of the paper again. "They give a few trophies to the same people over and over again, and they do it so they can say, 'See, we support hip-hop.'" 50 Cent smirked. "And what happens when someone comes along that they don't like? Someone who doesn't fit the image they want?" Eminem flipped back to the front of the page. the snub list. They bury you. The audience wasn't breathing. This wasn't a rant anymore. This was a breakdown of the entire system. Eminem continued. They let a few through. They hand out just enough awards to keep people quiet. But if you don't fit what they want, if you're not playing the game the way they like, 50 Cent chuckled, shaking his head. You're done. A few heads in the audience turned toward each other. Some artists had clearly been through it themselves. Then, 50 Cent let out a sharp laugh. And don't even get me started on who they give Grammys to before actual hip-hop legends. Eminem smirked. Oh, we're getting to that. At that moment, the industry knew. This wasn't just a speech. This was a reckoning. Eminem let the silence sit for a second. The audience was uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats, whispering, wondering just how far this was going to go. Then he went there. And some people, Eminem said, lifting the paper again, they figured out how to play the game perfectly. 50 Cent took a step forward, smirking. Oh yeah, some people cracked the code. The crowd tensed. They knew exactly where this was going. Eminem exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Look at Jay-Z. A few gasps. No one said a word. Look at Beyoncé. More whispers. This was a direct hit. 50 Cent didn't hold back. Jay, man, you know what I'm saying is true. You learned how to play the game, and they rewarded you for it. Eminem nodded. And I get it. You do what you gotta do. But let's be real. You think they ever would have let someone like DMX or Nas win over and over again like that? The tension in the room was almost unbearable now. Then 50 Cent dropped the real bombshell. You'll ever wonder why Blue Ivy got a Grammy before some of the biggest hip-hop artists of all time? Dead silence. Eminem folded the paper and placed it back on the podium. That's the game. That's how it works. And everybody in this room knows it. According to reports, Jay-Z and Beyoncé were seen looking shocked when they learned about this. 50 Cent nodded, looking out at the crowd. Some of y'all are gonna act like you don't see it, but we all know. And after tonight, nobody can pretend anymore. At that moment, the music industry changed. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. The audience, the network, the industry, nobody knew how to react. The weight of what had just been said hung in the air like an exposed wire. Eminem and 50 Cent hadn't just criticized the Grammys, they had ripped the entire system apart, live in front of millions. And there was no taking it back. Eminem, now leaning slightly against the podium, exhaled. The job was done. He had said everything he needed to say. But still, before he stepped away from the mic, he left one final statement hanging in the air. We don't need your trophies. We made history without you. Then, he pushed the paper away, letting it fall onto the podium like a discarded contract. 50 Cent chuckled, stepping forward. He took one last look at the audience, then at the cameras, then at the people in the room who refused to meet his eyes. And Jay, man, I ain't mad at you, but I ain't playing this game. And with that, they walked off the stage. Within minutes, the footage spread across social media. Fans divided. Some called Eminem and 50 Cent the realest to ever do it, saying they had finally exposed what people had whispered about for years. Others? Not so sure. Some people said they went too far, that dragging Jay-Z and Beyoncé into it was unnecessary, that they had just burned every bridge in the industry. The Grammys issued a statement within an hour, claiming they have always supported hip-hop and pointing to their previous winners. But it rang hollow, because the damage was done. According to reports, Jay-Z and Beyoncé were seen looking visibly shocked when they learned about what was said. Jay-Z, a man who had once boycotted the Grammys himself, now found himself at the center of the very thing he once fought against. Beyoncé, always poised, reportedly stayed silent. But the real question wasn't about their reaction. It was about what happened next. One thing is certain. Now the music industry trembles after Eminem and 50 Cent grab mic on live TV and expose Grammys. So now that the truth is out, the question is, will the industry finally change, or will they just find another way to keep the game rigged?